Good day, class. I'm architect Adolf Vincent Ivigor, and I'm going to be your instructor for Building Laws for Professional Practice 1. For a brief background, I am a graduate and alumni of this university, but I took my postgraduate diploma in project management with merit at the University of Liverpool. Okay, then I have more than around a decade of experience in construction. So today we're going to talk about the National Building Code of the Philippines. Now, we're not going to study the law as a whole, but we're going to dissect it into different components. For this week, we're going to tackle on its introductory sections. So we're going to study how it was created or why it was created. Okay? So the National Building Code of the Philippines, otherwise known as PD 1096. So according to PD 1096, it is adopting a national building code of the Philippines, thereby revising Republic Act numbered 6541. Okay, so its preceding law is RA 6541 before it was PD 96 was drafted. Okay, so these were the reasons why it was created. One, whereas the country's accelerating economic and physical development coupled with urbanization and population growth makes imperative the formulation and adoption of a uniform building code, which shall embody up-to-date and modern technical knowledge on building design, construction, use, occupancy, and maintenance. As you can see, class, the Philippines, as well as other Southeast Asian countries, have been experiencing rapid advances in technology and in economy for the past several decades. Okay, with this, you can also expect that buildings will also be constructed. Now, for those buildings to be safe and in uniform, conform with international standards, the nation must adopt a national building code to ensure that we all follow the same law in construction. Otherwise, if if our country continues to develop without a building code, then what would happen? Okay, so our country would be in a state of uh, chaos in terms of construction. Okay, remember, class, that the construction industry, when you construct buildings, you're not only concerned with aesthetics, you're also concerned with the safety of the people who will be using the facility itself. Okay? So whereas RA number 6541, an act to ordain and institute a national building of the Philippines, the same does not conform with the developmental goals and infrastructure program of the government, does not adequately provide for all the technological requirements of buildings and structures in terms of up-to-date design and construction standards and criteria. So, second paragraph, class, means that Republic Act 6541 was replaced because it no longer conforms with current technologies in buildings, and it does not conform the developmental goals and infrastructure program of the government. Also, it does not adequately provide for the technological requirements of buildings and structures. So when you think about it, construction technology in the 1940s and 50s greatly differ from the present. So that's why a national building code must be created which conforms with the latest advances in construction technology. Then, whereas in the formulation of a new national building code, it is the desire and policy of the government to avail of and harness the technical expertise and professional know-how of men, not only in the public but in the private sectors as well. Okay, so this is another reason for the formulation. It is for the government to harness and connect with the different technical experts in the field of construction, like architects, civil engineers, electrical, mechanical, ECE, and others. Okay? So in the fourth paragraph, one, two, three, four, we can see that the 100 prepared the law was Ferdinand E. Marcos. Now let's discuss chapter 1 or its general provisions. Okay? So it's important, class, as future architects, for you to at least memorize what PD 1096 is. So when you say PD 1096, section 101, which pertains to its title, so this decree shall be known as the National Building Code of the Philippines and shall hereinafter referred to as the code. So in the succeeding chapters of this book, whenever you refer to as code, it refers to the National Building Code. Please remember that. So section 102, Declaration of Policy. It is hereby declared to be the policy of the state to safeguard life, health, property, and public welfare, consistent with the principles of sound environmental management and control, and to this end, make it the purpose of this code to provide for all buildings and structures a framework of minimum standards and requirements to regulate their location, site, design, quality of materials, construction, use, occupancy, and maintenance. So let's dissect section 102. Now, please always remember that it is the policy of the government of the Republic of the Philippines to safeguard the life, health, welfare of the general public. Hence the promulgation of the National Building Code. Okay? But always remember, class, that the NBC is just a framework of minimum standards. Okay? When you say minimum, it is the bare minimum needed to make sure that the building is safe in terms of location, design, materials, construction, use, occupancy, and maintenance. So as future architects, it is our duty to not only abide with this minimum set of standards, but also make sure that the ones we construct are above, over, and beyond the minimum. Okay? Section 103, Scope and Application. The provisions of this code shall apply to the design, location, siting, construction, alteration, repair, conversion, use, occupancy, maintenance, moving, demolition, and of addition to public and private buildings and structures, except traditional indigenous family dwellings as defined herein. So what does this mean? Okay? It means that the operation of this code will regulate the design, the overall engineering and architectural design of buildings, where it's going to be located, its site, construction, alteration. So what does alteration mean? It means that you're going to change the use of an old building to something new. Or you're going to alter, repair, conversion. Okay? Then, aside from that, the scope and limitation of PD 1096 extends not only to private buildings and structures, but to public buildings as well. So, both private and public sectors are under the law. Second, buildings and or structures constructed before the approval of this code shall not be affected thereby except when alterations, additions, conversions, or repairs are to be made therein, in which case this code shall apply only to portions to be altered, added, or converted, or repaired. So, Before this law was formulated, there were already existing structures or buildings. So these shall not be affected when this law was made. However, if you're going to make repairs or renovations to them, then you must apply the provision of the code which apply to the sections. Okay? Then another thing also, please remember class that traditional indigenous family dwellings as defined later on in this code are all exempted. Okay? So that's for section 103 for scope and application. Okay? This is very important class. Please don't take this for granted because most there are building disputes which fall into the categories of traditional indigenous family dwellings and or buildings created before the promulgation of this code. Now, if you're going to encounter clientele someday which fall into these categories, you must remember them. Okay? Section 104, the general building requirements. So, all buildings or structures, as well as accessory facilities thereto, shall conform in all respect to the principles of safe construction. It must be suited for the purpose for which they are designed. So, what does this mean? When you say class principles of safe construction, so let's dissect that. So when you construct something class, you don't only make sure that the building is completed on time, on quality, and on cost, you must also make sure that it has an excellent safety record during construction, and after construction, it must be safe to use. For example, if you're going to apply glass in your skyscraper or building, you must make sure that it is constructed in such a way that when there's an earthquake, the glass will not fall down to the people passing by. Okay? Another, it must be suited to the purpose for which they are designed. For example, when you design when you design a residential building, it must be suited for residential purpose or living purpose for human beings. So you don't design residential buildings that will make the user feel like they're living in a warehouse or it have inadequate ventilation. Okay? B. Buildings or structures intended to be used for the manufacture and reproduction of any kind of article or product shall observe adequate environmental standards. So this refers to factories. Okay? So when you build factories, they must conform to certain environmental standards. C. Buildings or structures and all parts thereof, as well as all facilities found therein, shall be maintained in safe, sanitary, and good working condition. Section 105, Site Requirements. The land or site upon which will be constructed any building or structure, any ancillary or auxiliary facility too shall be sanitary, hygienic, or safe. In the case of sites or buildings intended for use as human habitation or abode, the same shall be at a safe distance as determined by competent authorities from streams or bodies of water and or sources of air considered to be polluted, from a volcano site or volcanic site or any building considered to be a potential source of fire or explosion. So what's the significance of this one? So it means that, for example, when you construct a residential building, a condominium, or a subdivision project, you must make sure to check the site. How far is it from the nearest fault lines? Is it near a volcano? Is the area a geohazard location? Is it a flooded area? So those are the things that you must check as the architect. Okay. Now let's go to section 106 or its definitions. So as used in this code, the words, terms, and phrases enumerated in Annex A shall have the meaning or definition correspondingly herein. So let's skip that. Okay, let's go for the meanings. So it's not looking it's not in my copy. Okay, we will get back to that one class. Now, forgive me, class, if building laws to you may seem boring at first. But mind you, when you are already practicing architects, this can really help you a lot. Okay? The knowledge of the laws pertaining to buildings will help you in your designs and could also aid you in advising your clients on the right things to do regarding their buildings. Okay? So it's not in my copy, but I'm going to attach it in our group page or discussion. Okay, so let's move on to chapter 2, administration and enforcement. So in section 201, responsibility for administration and enforcement. So the administration and enforcement of the provision of this code, including the imposition of penalties for administrative violations, therefore, is hereby vested in the Secretary of Public Works, Transportation, and Communications, hereinafter referred to as the Secretary. So, since the law was created in the time of President Ferdinand Marcos, I think Secretary of Public Works means that today the Secretary of the DPWH, the Department of Public Works and Highways. Section 202, Technical Staff. The Secretary is hereby authorized to constitute and provide in his department a professional staff composed of highly qualified architects, engineers, and technicians who possess diversified and professional experience in the field of building design and construction. Okay, so let's move. Section 20T, the general powers and functions of the Secretary under this code. For the purposes of carrying out the provision of this code, the Secretary shall exercise the following powers and functions. So one, first power of the Secretary, formulate policies, plans, standards, and guidelines on building design, construction, use, occupancy, and maintenance in accordance with the code. So the Secretary will be the one to formulate the policies, plans, design standards on building design, construction, use, occupancy, and maintenance. Okay? But it is something with the aid of his highly qualified architects, engineers, and technicians who will assist the secretary in formulating these guidelines. Next, issue and promulgate rules and regulations to implement the provisions of this code and ensure compliance with policies, standards, and guidelines formulated in paragraph 1 of this section. 3. Evaluate, review, approve, and/or take final action on changes or amendments to existing referral codes, as well as on the incorporation of other referral codes which are not yet expressly made part of this code. Number 4, prescribe and fix the amount of fees and other charges that the building official shall collect in connection with the performance of regulatory functions. Okay? So these are the four general powers and functions of the Secretary of the DPWH under PD 1096. Now let's go to section 204, Professional and Technical Assistance. The Secretary, with the assistance of his technical staff, shall provide such professional, technical, scientific, and other services, including testing laboratories and facilities as may be required to carry out the provisions of this code. So what are the purpose of these testing laboratories? So these are generally important, class, especially if you are looking into the strength of concrete. Okay, so there are laboratories which determine how strong your structure is to make sure that they are compliant with with the minimum standards stated here. Provided that the Secretary may secure such services as he may deem necessary from the agent of the national government and may make arrangement for the compensation of such services. He may also engage and compensate within appropriations available therefore the services of such number of consultants, experts, and advisors on full or part-time basis as may be necessary coming from the government or private businesses, entities, or associations to carry out the provisions of this code. Now, to enforce this code, class, and to develop it from time to time, the Secretary will not only require assistance from his technical staff from the public sector, but also from those from the private sectors as well. Section 205, Building Officials. This is something you must familiarize yourself, as the building officials will be the one who will approve your building permits in the future. Okay? So, except as otherwise provided herein, the building officials are responsible for carrying out the provisions of this code in the field, as well as enforcement of orders and decisions made pursuant thereto. So that's the function of the building official. So he will be the one responsible for carrying out the provisions of the code, as well as the enforcement of orders and decisions made. Okay. Due to the exigencies of the service, the Secretary may designate incumbent public works, district engineers, city engineers, municipal engineers to act as building officials in the respective areas of jurisdiction. So, as you can see, class, you won't see the term architect here. Okay? Why is that? Why is it district engineers, city engineers, and municipal engineers to act as building officials? Okay. This because, class, after World War II, when the Philippines was devastated greatly with that unfortunate war, there was a lack of architects. So there were less architects during that time. So the engineers, they were asked to aid in nation building, okay, because of the few number of architects during that period. Okay? But right now, since the number of architects, licensed architects have increased, in some cities and municipalities, you can see city architects and municipal architects who, who acts as building officials. Okay? The designation made by the Secretary under this section shall continue until regular positions of building official are approved or unless sooner terminated for causes by law or decree. So, what are the qualifications of your building officials? One, a Filipino citizen and of good moral character. So when you say good moral character class, it means that the building official must not have what you call this, mm, a background which is not suitable for the position. Okay, a Filipino citizen. So he must be a Filipino and not a citizen of another nation. Okay, this is important class since the position of building officials are important in nation building. So that is why only a Filipino citizen may hold this position. Second, he must be a duly registered architect or civil engineer according to the law. Number three, a member of good standing of a duly accredited organization of his profession for not less than 2 years. So when you say good standing, what do you mean by good standing, class? It means that the architect or civil engineers paid, he's active in his membership. For in the case of architects, the United Architects of the Philippines, in the case of civil engineers, PICE. Okay? Then has at least 5 years of diversified and professional experience in building design and construction. So this is really important, class. Why is it that kailangan pa ng, why 5 years is needed? Okay. Why can't a fresh graduate hold this position immediately? As you can see, class, the profession of architecture and engineering uh, experience is important. Okay, because there are a lot of things which cannot be which theory cannot quantify alone. Okay, so that's why the longer you are, the more you accumulate actual knowledge in the construction of buildings and how to avoid mm, mistakes. Section 207, the duties of a building official. In his respective territorial jurisdiction, the building official shall be primarily responsible for the enforcement of the provisions of this code as well as of the implementing rules and regulations issued therefore. It is the official charged with the duties of issuing building permits. So take note of this one, issuing of building permits. In the performance of his duties, a building official may enter any building or its premises at all reasonable times to inspect and determine compliance with the requirements of this code and the terms and conditions provided for in the building permit as issued. So as a building official, class, in his official capacity and function, he is given authority to enter buildings at all reasonable times to inspect if it is compliant with the code. When any building work is found to be contrary to the provisions of this code, the building official may order the work stopped and prescribe the terms and or conditions when the work will be allowed to resume. So for example, if the building official inspect a building and he finds that this building does not comply with the minimum standards, then he or she may stop the work. and prescribe when it may begin again. Likewise, the building official is authorized to order the discontinuance of the occupancy of any building or structure or portion thereof found to be occupied or used contrary to the provisions of this code. Okay? So, what's the meaning of this one, class? That paragraph. So, the building official is authorized to order the discontinuance of the occupancy or use of any building or structure portion thereof which is contrary to the provisions of this code. Now, for example, mm, when somebody builds a warehouse, but instead of using that building as a warehouse, building a structure as a warehouse, that warehouse is used as a residential for multiple families. Now, the building official has the power to order the discontinuance of occupancy of that structure. Okay? Now, let's go to section 208, the fees. Every building official shall keep a minimum record and accurate account of all fees and other charges fixed and authorized by the Secretary to be collected and received under this code. Subject to existing budgetary, accounting, and auditing rules and regulations, the building official is hereby authorized to retain not more than 20% of his collection for the operating expenses of his office. That's 20%. He can retain 20% of the collections. The remaining 80% shall be deposited to the city or municipal treasurer, shall accrue to the general fund of the province or municipality. Okay? Now let's go to exemption. Public buildings and traditional indigenous family dwellings shall be exempt from payment of building permit fees. So, public buildings. So these are buildings which are for the government, and traditional indigenous family dwellings. This one we will define this later. Okay? As used in the code, the term traditional indigenous dwelling means a dwelling intended for the use of the family of the owner and constructed of native materials such as bamboo, nipa, logs, lumber, the total cost of which does not exceed 15,000 pesos. So when you're talking about the Bahay Kubo class, of course, they're exempted. Now, one thing you must remember is that this 15,000 pesos, this was formulated in the time of the late President Ferdinand Marcos. So when you add inflation to it, so this should be more than 15,000. But what is important to remember is that materials, as long as you use bamboo, nipa, logs, or lumber, they are exempted from this code. Okay. Section 210, the use of income from fees. Any provision of law to the contrary notwithstanding, the Secretary is hereby authorized to prescribe the procedures for the use of all net income realized by the office of the building official from the collection of fees and charges not exceeding 20%. So previously we talked about 20%. The building official can retain 20% for the operation of his office from the collections. Okay? Such income may be used to cover necessary operating expenses, including the purchase of equipment, supplies, materials, travel expenses, obligation expenses, sheriff's fees, and repayment of other prior year's obligations not adequately funded, subject to existing budgetary and auditing rules and regulations. Now let's go to section 211, the implementing rules and regulations. In the implementation of the provision of this code, the Secretary shall formulate necessary rules and regulations and adopt design and construction standards and criteria for buildings and other structures. Such standards, rules, and regulations take effect after the publication once a week for 3 consecutive weeks in a newspaper of general circulation. Okay? So what's the meaning of this class? Okay? So it means that during the implementation of this code, the secretary can adopt new technologies for construction and design, provided that these new standards, rules, and regulations will take effect after their publication once a week for 3 consecutive weeks. So for 3 consecutive weeks, this will be published in your newspaper, which circulates all around the country before it may take effect. Okay? Please remember this one. Regulation take effect after once a week after 3 consecutive weeks. So that's the only way it's going to be legal. This is like this class. This is important because it means that the code does not only is not only limited to existing technologies. It also adapts because construction technology and design it advances every decade. So it is important for our code to be continuously updated to the present. Okay? For example, in other countries, they're already using uh, GRC panels or glass reinforced concrete panels, which are very light, but you can create different complicated design which are not possible using ordinary concrete. Okay, next, section 212, administrative fines. For the violation of any provision of this code or any rules or regulation issued thereafter, the Secretary is hereby empowered to prescribe and impose fines not exceeding 10,000 pesos. So when you say 10,000 pesos, this is the 10,000 pesos back at the time when the president was Marcos. Okay, so when you talk about inflation, this could be more than this, more than 10,000 pesos already during this period. Section 213, the penal provisions. It shall be unlawful for any person, firm, or corporation to erect, construct, enlarge, alter, repair, move, improve, remove, convert, demolish, equip, use, occupy, or maintain any building or structure, or cause the same to be done contrary or to or in violation of any provision of this code. Okay? Any person, firm, or corporation who shall violate any the provisions of this code and or commit any act hereby declared to be unlawful shall upon conviction be punished by a fine not more than 20,000 pesos or by imprisonment of not more than 2 years or by both such fine and imprisonment. Okay? So if a firm or corporation class, if they violated the provisions of this code, a variety of things may happen to them. They could be fined, they could be imprisoned, or they could be fined and imprisoned. Okay? Provided that in the case of a corporation, firm, partnership, or association, the penalty shall be imposed upon its officials responsible for such violation. In the case the guilty party is an alien, shall immediately be deported after payment of the fine and or service of his sentence. So let's dissect this. This is important. Now, when you say it's a corporation, firm, partnership, or association, means that this is a group of more than one individual. That surely, class, if there are 200 people in a corporation, not everybody should be imprisoned. Okay? Only the officials responsible for the violation shall be imprisoned. Okay? When you see what are the important officials of a corporation, it's CEO, CFO, no board members, for example. Okay? If the guilty part is an alien, so when you say alien class, not talking about someone from Mars or Venus or from other planets. When you say alien, meaning not a resident of this country, He shall be immediately deported after he pays the fine and or services his sentence. For example, after he finishes his or her sentence of 2 years and he pays the fine, he will be deported. He or she will be deported back to his original country. So these are the penal provisions. This is important, class, for you to always remember because during your practice, you'll meet a lot of people who does not know of the existence of this law. Okay? So these penal provisions are the teeth of this law. You may not be lawyers, but I expect you to at least be very familiar with the National Building Code or PD 1096. Section 214, dangerous and ruinous buildings or structures. Another important uh, section to take note. So when you say dangerous and ruinous buildings or structures, what are these? So dangerous buildings are those which are here declared as such or are structurally unsafe or not provided with safe egress, always constitute a fire hazard or any otherwise dangerous to human life, which in relation to its use constitute a hazard to property because of inadequate maintenance, dilapidation, obsolescence, or abandonment, or which otherwise contribute to the pollution of the site or the community to an intolerable degree. So when you say class structurally unsafe, well, what structures are structurally unsafe? Okay? If the structure is constructed without the involvement of a structural engineer, and you can visibly see some cracks or um, just some indications that it might collapse. These are these are buildings that are dangerous to the public. Another thing is not provided the safe egress. Okay. In the study of architecture class, when you design buildings, you must take into account the nature of human beings during panic or fire. So what happens class when people are in panic or during the fire? Which direction will they move? So those are the psychology of users that you must understand. Otherwise, they won't find the exit to your building or a stampede will be created during panic. Okay? So that's why it is important for architects and engineers to collaborate in the design and construction of buildings. These two professionals are important. Section 215, abatement of dangerous buildings. When any building or structure is found or declared to be dangerous or ruinous, the building official shall order its repair, vacation, or demolition, depending upon the degree of danger to life, health, or safety. This is not prejudice to further action may be taken under provisions of Article 482, 694 to 727 of the Civil Code of the Philippines. Please research this one class and read this. Okay? So, when you say the building official can, when a structure is already declared as dangerous or ruinous by the city or the building official, the building official can order its repair, vacation. So what do you mean by vacation? No, the building will not go into into Boracay or anything. It means that the building official will order the occupants to vacate the building because it's no longer safe. Okay, then demolition in extreme cases wherein the structure could no longer be repaired. Okay? So it depends upon the degree of danger to life, health, or safety. Section 216, other remedies. The rights, actions, and remedies provided in this code shall be in addition to any and all other rights of actions that may be available under existing laws. Okay? So we're going to discuss chapter 3 next week, class. So this is just a brief introduction to you about the National Building Code of the Philippines. Uh, I don't require you to memorize, class, the law, but I want you to gain an understanding of it, because as future architects, your duty will be to design and plan buildings and structures which conforms to the minimum standards of the building code. When you say minimum, these are the minimum standards, but you can go higher than that. Okay? You must understand this because during your practice, this will help not only you, but it will benefit your client as well. Because we are tasked to protect the interests of our client in terms of health and safety. Okay, so please read chapter 1 and 2 again and try to understand why the law was developed, how it was developed, and try to relate um, how it was conceptualized during that period. Okay, so don't only try to memorize this objectively, but understand the soul and gist of the law. Okay, so thank you, class. I will be posting in our class page your first assignment for the week. Okay, so I welcome you once again in our class for professional practice 1 or building laws. Uh, I I hope that you won't get bored with the lesson, and please have interest in it, because as a future architects, knowledge of PD 1096 will really help you out in your future practice. Okay, so thank you and see you next